Charles's stomach twisted at that moment. An Audi R8 was $1 million. What's wrong? Are you regretting it? Daryl joked, looking at Charles's face, as if he was constipated. Charles quickly shook his head and said, No, no. I was thinking that it was a great choice, President Darby. This R8 is a perfect match for you. Immediately, Charles instructed his man to prepare the necessary documentation for Daryl. His face was full of smiles, but his heart was bleeding. 30 minutes later, Daryl casually drove off in the R8, leaving the Audi headquarters. At that moment, looking at Charles presenting an R8 to Daryl in such a respectful manner, all the workers at the center were puzzled and did not understand the situation. Phoebe especially was shocked and lost for words. Was Manager Luke out of his mind? Looking at the complicated expression on Charles' face, she dared not ask anything. On Daryl's end, after settling the collaboration with the Audi Corporation, Daryl had nothing much left to do. The next day, he gave Lily a call. Knowing that Daryl was returning, Lily was on cloud 9. She waited at home instead of going to the office. In the dining hall, Samantha was sitting on the sofa in her pajamas and wet hair, after her shower. As a matter of fact, she looked even more sexy and elegant after her shower. Samantha said, "That useless man, why do you let him return? You refused to tell me how it went yesterday when you met Charles. What are you thinking?" Lily replied subtly, "Mum, I do not wish to divorce at the moment. What's good being with this useless one? The only thing was that 2 days he offered to switch places as a hostage and that made you feel touched?" Samantha slammed the table angrily and said, "I tell you, Lilybud, do not let yourself feel touched over just a small matter. Think about it. Are you happy during these 3 years of marriage? No matter what, I will not be satisfied with Daryl. The son-in-laws of other families, all have net worth of a few million, as compared to this useless one." In the middle of the conversation, noises could be heard from outside. Samantha looked out naturally and she shivered at what she saw. A brand new white Audi sports car was driving slowly in. The most shocking sight was the person who stepped out from the car. This body was one she would never forget. This person dressed cheaply is the useless man, Daryl? "I'm back," said Daryl, with a big smile on his face while walking toward Lily. Lily nodded and glanced at the Audi R8 parked outside. Noticing Lily's curiosity, Daryl smiled and said, "This was the car I helped to get for my boss. I am off today, hence he let me take a drive." Lily understood, but in her heart, she doubted him. What kind of boss would be so generous to allow his staff to drive his new car? At the same time, Samantha recovered from her shock but could not stop laughing. "So the whole ordeal is that you are driving someone else's car. I thought the useless you had finally turned over a new leaf." Daryl smiled, but ignored her remarks. Samantha got angrier, turned to Lily and said, "Lilybud, I really don't understand why you're still hesitating. Isn't that Charles that I introduced you to great? You should divorce this useless one immediately. The more I see him, the more upset I become." "Mum." Lily bit her lips tightly, shaking her head and said, "You don't need to interfere with my business. At least he found a job now. I hope to give him a chance. He has found a job, so he definitely has change." Samantha almost blew her top and was speechless. She could not figure out what was wrong with her daughter. She stared sharply at Daryl and went into her room. Daryl grinned and said while looking at Lily, "Are you really not going to divorce me now?" Lily replied calmly, "Don't celebrate too early. I am still observing you." Daryl nodded without saying a word. He respected Lily's wish. No matter what, for the past 3 years he married into their family. Lily was under a lot of pressure because of him. "I am tired and I'm going to rest inside." The atmosphere was rather awkward, so Daryl went to his room after saying that. Lily did not follow but sat down on the sofa, deep in thought. At that moment, Lily's heart felt complicated. Was her decision earlier right or wrong? She gave him another chance so that he could give her a wonderful future? At the same time, on Samantha's end, she was stressed, angry and speechless at her daughter's stubbornness. She grumbled out loud, "No, I cannot let the useless one continue to be part of our family." Taking out her cell phone, she dialed a number. The number she dialed was to Charles. Once the call was connected, Charles answered politely with a hint of hesitance, "Aunt Samantha, is everything all right?" Samantha immediately asked, "Charles, how was the meeting between you and Lilybud yesterday?" Her gentle voice was as if her son-in-law was on the other end of the line. On the other side of the line, Charles felt rather awkward as he laughed and said, Aunt Samantha, I am not suitable for Lilybud. What? He spoke carefully. Also, I feel that Lilybud and Daryl are good together. They are a good match. I do not wish to go between them. The smile on Charles's face looked as if he was crying. Samantha had a shiver down her spine with a face full of surprise. Charles, are you okay? Charles spoke politely. I am fine, Aunt Samantha. Oh yes, if you were to meet Darby, Daryl, please let him know that I wish Lily and him all the best, all the best. He was so nervous that he almost called out President Darby. At that moment, Charles had cold sweat all over his body. Luckily, he managed to stop, otherwise if he made President Darby unhappy, there will be no further collaboration with Audi Corporation. Hearing this, Samantha felt lost for a moment. What was going on? Was it not that Charles had always looked to her daughter as a goddess? Charles looked nervous and said, Aunt Samantha, I have something coming up. I can't talk longer. He hung up the call right after. Hearing the dial tone, Samantha could not gather herself together for quite some time. What was going on today? First, her daughter turned weird and now Charles. Earlier, he promised her he would definitely get Lily to his side, but today he completely changed. Unable to figure out anything, Samantha walked out of her room feeling depressed. Jade greeted Samantha, who was walking out with a smile. How do you do, madam? Samantha smiled, nodded and said, Jade, you are here. Take a seat. Samantha squeezed her brows and yelled, Daryl, come down here now. Can't you hear we have a guest here? Shouldn't you come and greet the guest? Where are your manners? Hearing Samantha's screams from his room, Daryl walked out. At that moment, Jade, who previously wore a smile, looked shocked. She whispered to Lily, Sister Lily, Darby. Daryl Darby is home? Ever since she heard from Samson at the Moonlit River Bar that Daryl was indeed the second son of the Darby family, she rarely visited the Linden family to meet Lily. She dared not. She came to catch up with Lily because she heard yesterday that Daryl has not been around for the past few days. She never expected that she would bump into Daryl the day he returned. Lily said calmly, he just returned today. Jade was just about to say something, but she stopped immediately as she saw Daryl coming down from upstairs. She buried her head, and dared not look at him. Seeing Jade there, Daryl smiled cheekily. Samantha stared at Daryl and instructed, Why are you still standing there? Go and quickly serve some tea. Daryl did not move, as if he heard nothing. After Samantha finished speaking, Jade stood up immediately and shook her arms. No, it is not necessary. I am not thirsty. I am not thirsty. Brother-in-law, don't be bothered. While talking, Jade cautiously took note of Daryl's reaction. What a joke. How can she let the second son of the Darby serve her tea unless she did not want to have a good life anymore? Lily asked while squeezing her brow as she noticed Jade behaving abnormally today and said, Jade, what is wrong with you today? Jade instantly nodded her head and said, Nothing. Maybe it's because I didn't sleep well last night. Samantha was a little shocked too. What was happening? Why did it feel like everyone was so fearful of this useless man? Thinking deeper, Samantha came to her senses while looking at his impoverished look. She realized that Jade embraced cleanliness, so she must have felt that the useless one was dirty, and hence refused to let him serve her tea. Thinking of that, Samantha glared at Daryl. Despite the fact that Daryl did not say a word, Jade still felt really uncomfortable. After staying for a while, Jade finally could not take the pressure any longer, so she stood up and said, Sister Lily, I just remembered that there is something I need to look into. I can't stay long to chat. I'm leaving. You're in such a hurry? Lily stood up and asked, I didn't see you driving here just now. How did you come here? Jade smiled and said, My car was sent for service, so I called a cab. I will call a cab again to go back. Samantha smiled, pointed to Daryl and said, Why bother to call a cab? Just get him to send you home. What? Jade started to shiver and quickly declined, That is not necessary. I will just call a cab. Samantha said, Don't worry about it. Let him send you home, since he has nothing to do around the house as well. You don't have to feel shy when it comes to this useless one. Jade hesitated after hearing Samantha's words as she was surprised too. Aunt Samantha still did not know who he was. She was still calling him the useless one? Just at that juncture, Daryl stood up and said, Let's go. Jade dared not to reject once Daryl had spoken, so she just nodded. Few minutes later, Daryl was driving Jade out of the community and into the main road. Jade was unsettled and she said carefully, "Brother Daryl, you can let me off here. I will call a cab to get home." Daryl smiled looking at her and said, "What did you just call me? Did you forget what you agreed with me earlier?" Jade shivered. How could she forget what happened at the moonlit river bar? She bit her lips and said softly, "Father." Daryl smiled and nodded, "That is better. You don't have to be nervous. I will send you home since I am already out anyway." Jade hurriedly replied, "Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Father." She bit her lips so hard it almost bled. Very soon, Daryl had driven into the city. It was undeniable that the R8 model was really cool. Together with the gorgeous and sexy lady like Jade in the passenger seat, it was the epitome of beauty. Many passers-by turned to look at them in awe. Daryl held onto the steering wheel, not showing any emotion. However, deep down in his heart, he was enjoying the glamour. At that moment, a disharmonious voice was heard from the side, "Hey! Isn't that the useless Daryl from our house?" Daryl turned to where the voice was from and his face sunk. William Linden. This fella must be out there shopping. He was dressed casually with his gorgeous-looking female secretary following him from behind. The secretary was holding a couple of shopping bags in her hands. This guy was too much. Lily was working tirelessly, representing the Linden family to work with Platinum Corporation, but he was out here spending the company's money, looking all chic with the secretary. Daryl smiled coldly in his heart. He was too lazy to be bothered and decided to speed up and leave. However, there were too many pedestrians in front. Hence, it was impossible to speed up. Seeing that Daryl ignored him, William smiled coldly and teased, "Daryl, you're doing great now. Driving an Audi R8 I see." He glared into the passenger seat while he spoke, looking at Jade. Attracted to Jade's beauty, William was shocked for a little while, and smiled. "This lady here doesn't look familiar. What's your name?" Although Jade was Lily's best friend, William had never seen her before. Hence, he did not know who she was. As such, Jade did not know who William was either. Not knowing what was going on, she dared not speak. She just pretended she did not hear anything. Daryl looked at William emotionlessly and said, "What does knowing her name have to do with you?" William was upset and raised his voice. "Daryl, you're just a live-in son-in-law. There is no need to pretend. Are you feeling proud because you are driving an R8? Is this even your car?" William glared at Jade again while he spoke. He was confident that the car belonged to Jade. As for the relationship between Daryl and Jade, there was no need to think further. Looking at Daryl while smiling coldly but remaining speechless, William continued teasing, "You have your way then, Daryl. You've stayed 3 years in our Linden family with no contribution, willingly became a toy boy, and now even hooked up with a rich lady? Hey, you really humiliate the Linden family." By now, the place was surrounded with people who were watching. Listening to what William just said, everyone in the vicinity started to explode. Haha. So, this guy is the live-in son-in-law of the Lindens family. I thought he was a second generation from a wealthy family. He really has thick skin. He is really superbly unique, being able to live like that. Interesting. A toy boy at home yet at the same time hooked up with a rich woman outside? What a way. When this useless one married Goddess Lily. It was the joke of the entire Donghai city. Haha. Today, we finally meet the useless one. The comments came one after another and Daryl started getting angry. Shit, this William Linden. He had to humiliate Daryl each time they met. Otherwise, he would not be comfortable. At that moment, Jade was really angry to the point that there were chills on the beautiful face of hers. After being alive for so many years, that was the first time she was being accused in public. Even if she needed a man, she did not need to chase after Daryl. Just when William continued talking, Jade pushed open the car door and got down. Instantly, everyone focused their attention onto Jade. Many of them were attracted to Jade's sexy figure. However, they were also puzzled by her actions. What did she want to do? In their hearts, many had the same thoughts. In plain sight, Jade walked toward William in her stilettos. Looking at Jade who was in front of him, William smiled and said casually, "Pretty girl. You didn't know that this guy is a live-in son-in-law? No worries, you don't have to thank me." Slap. At the crystal clear sound of the slap, almost half of the street went silent. Everyone around them were stunned. You cheap woman. How dare you hit me?" William was still in shock as he stared blankly at Jade. He only came to his senses after a while, and started shouting. His secretary by his side was shocked too. She quickly held onto William's arm and asked softly, "Brother William, are you all right?" She then stared at Jade and said, "How could you hit him?" Jade did not even look at the secretary but stared at William and said coldly, "I slapped you, so what? Don't humans like you with mouths full of dirty and humiliating words deserve to be slapped?" At that juncture, Jade regained her previously aggressive self with little effort. She managed to take out William and his secretary. Everyone surrounding them was stunned. "Hey, this beauty has a hot temper. Sizzling hot." Many of them started to talk about Jade. Silently of course, as they worried Jade might hear them, and they might annoy the fierce, beautiful lady. However, the crowd did not notice that when Jade was scolding William harshly, her focus was actually on Daryl's reaction. As she saw Daryl's mouth curve upward smiling in agreement of her actions, Jade felt more encouraged. "You, the filthy one that looked down on people. You think that Brother Darby needs a rich woman? You must be blind. Brother Darby?" After listening to how Jade addressed Daryl, everyone was yet again stunned. William was shocked too. After a few lines of scolding, Jade turned around and went back into the car. Standing there politely, she smiled sweetly and said, "Brother Darby, I didn't do anything wrong just now, right?" Daryl replied casually, "You did great." Jade was so happy to get the recognition from Daryl. She added, "My car is in that workshop right in front of you for maintenance. Don't bother, Brother Darby, you don't have to send me any further." Daryl nodded and said, "Fine, you may go." Jade quickly replied to him and bid farewell to Daryl. Under the curious gaze of everyone present, she turned and walked toward the exit. After Jade left, people that gathered around left as well, feeling that there would be nothing else interesting that would happen. At that juncture, William regathered his thoughts as he felt the burning pain on his face. With flames in his eyes, he stared at Daryl and said, "Daryl, so now you're not with a rich woman but having an affair instead. Confess now, what's with this car? Did Lily use her position at work and the company's money for it?" Listening to William starting to speak nonsense again, Daryl felt ridiculous and calmly said, "You don't need to know how I got my car. The car does not have a single thing to do with your family's company." After saying that, looking at the traffic in front starting to ease, Daryl stepped on the accelerator and left. As William watched Daryl leave coldly, his anger boiled and he cursed. "Shit, Daryl Darby, we'll see. I'm not done with you yet." Then, he left the busy street with his secretary. At Platinum Entertainment, after leaving the busy streets, Daryl went back to his office, and sent a message to Lily that he would not be going home later that night as he was busy. Lily did not question further and just replied with 3 words. "Fine, I know." The incident with William earlier totally did not affect Daryl's mood. Despite William's position in the Linden family, he was Granny Linden's favorite. In Daryl's eyes, he was only a clown, a retard. After confirming with Pearl that there were no other tasks that the headquarters required him to look into, Daryl proceeded to take a nap in the resting lounge. When he woke up later, he saw a wooden box behind the door, remembering the birthday present that Samson gave him the other day. Daryl reached out to the box and opened it. A light scent emerged from the wooden box when it was opened. Daryl was stunned. Inside the box was a round pill. A kidney tonic pill? A performance enhancement pill? An energy pill? For a moment, Daryl's mind was full of images of male health products as seen on the TV. He felt angry and funny at the same time. What was Samson trying to do? Playing fool with him? He would not dare to do that. Confused, Daryl gave Samson a call. Samson politely answered the call once it connected. "Mr. Darby, are there any instructions for me?" Daryl took a deep breath and said, "What is the pill you gave me for?" Hearing Daryl asking about the pill, Samson immediately explained in detail. Haha, Mr. Darby, please do not be angry. I asked someone to get the pill from a master for me. It was said that it would strengthen one's health. Do you know that the master is really famous? A normal person would never be able to get it. I had to. Daryl was confused listening to him and quickly said, That's fine. It's all good now. You can get back to work." After hanging up the phone, Daryl was staring at the pill in doubt. To take, or not to take it? Thinking that Samson would never harm him, Daryl swallowed the pill. Right after he swallowed the pill, Daryl regretted. This was because he felt there was a heat wave growing in his stomach. then through his entire body. At the same time, inexplainable pain attacked his nerves. Daryl could not stand the feeling, rolling on the floor, and everything then went pitch black. He fainted. When he woke up again, Daryl realized he was lying on the floor in the office. He was sweating profusely and his clothes were drenched. The burning and pain throughout his body had now disappeared. Shit, Samson must have been cheated. 2 years have passed and whatever effects the pill had would have been gone by now. How was he so silly and ate it? Luckily nothing bad happened. As he was feeling lucky, his cell phone rang. Seeing an unknown number displayed, Daryl squeezed his brows and answered it. How are you? Is this Daryl? Once the call was connected, a gentle yet attractive voice came through the phone, sounding good and attractive. This voice sounded rather familiar. Daryl squeezed his brows further and asked, "You are?" She introduced herself with a smile. "Oh, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Yvonne Young." Yvonne? Gulp. Daryl swallowed his saliva. An extremely gentle and sexy figure appeared in his mind. The next moment, Daryl smiled and asked, "What is the matter?" Yvonne sounded awkward and said, "It's about the other day during Granny Samantha's birthday dinner at the Linden's family. I know you presented her a Boundless Universe fan. I would like to take a few pictures, please." Daryl was a little shocked, and casually asked, "Oh, that." The Linden family thought it was a broken fan. "Why is Ms. Young interested in it now?" Yvonne answered without hesitation. "That is because they do not appreciate what it is. I know the history of the fan. It is a genuine item which was possessed by the Qianlong Emperor." Daryl was moved and said, "All right then, how do you wish to take pictures? You agree? That's great." Yvonne was so happy. She thought that Daryl would have rejected her request, as the fan was the one and only one. It was a priceless treasure indeed. Excitedly, Yvonne smiled and answered, If you are free, we can meet at my family's antique store later. There's a room designated for taking pictures of antique items." She then gave Daryl the address of the store. The antique store mentioned by Yvonne was named Pearl Pavilion. It was the largest antique shop in Donghai City. Daryl had always heard about it, but had never been there. Half an hour later, Daryl arrived at Pearl Pavilion with his item. Entering the main hall, he could see that Yvonne was already there waiting, in a dark-colored long dress. It looked more mysterious than the one she wore to Granny Samantha's birthday dinner. "Daryl, you are here." As Daryl walked in, Yvonne walked forward with a smile. Looking at the box in Daryl's hand, her beautiful eyes shone with excitement and passion. The person in charge of Pearl Pavilion, Peter William, looked curious. Ms. Yvonne had always carried herself with perfect rationale and poise. She would never crack a joke. Thus, why was she so happy today? Also, who is this cheap-looking guy? Noticing the Peter's curiosity, Yvonne made a brief introduction. "This is Daryl, Mr. Darby from the Linden family. We have some matters to discuss, so watch the store and call me if there is anything." While speaking, she led Daryl into a private room. Peter was completely stunned. Daryl Darby from the Linden family? Was he not just a useless live-in son-in-law? What did Ms. Yvonne have to discuss with such a person? Although in doubt, William did not think further. He drew his attention back to the store. After Daryl followed Yvonne into the private room, he took out the fan and displayed it on the table. Yvonne, who was holding the camera, carefully took pictures while admiring the item. On the other hand, Daryl's attention was all on Yvonne. Yvonne was really attractive, beautiful and had perfect facial features. Her body was as sexy as one could be. While he was deeply mesmerized by her, Yvonne finished the photo shoot. She smiled and thanked him. "Thank you, so much." Daryl put the fan away and casually answered, "It's just a small matter. If Ms. Young would like to see it again, feel free to contact me anytime." Hearing what Daryl had just said, Yvonne nodded happily and asked curiously, "How did you get the fan?" Honestly, she wanted to ask the question during Granny Samantha's family birthday dinner, but he did not get the chance to do so. A live-in son-in-law of the Linden family that was always being looked down on, sat at home for 3 years without a job. No income, but owned the Boundless Universe fan. Even a person with a clear logical mind like Yvonne could not refrain herself from being curious. Daryl laughed and casually said, "It's a gift from a friend." She understood that Daryl was only trying to brush it off, so Yvonne smiled and did not ask further. At that juncture, Peter knocked on the door. Yvonne briefly asked, "Yes, is there anything?" Peter, who was slightly ashamed, said, "Miss, please come out. Someone would like to purchase some jades. I can't decide." Yvonne was slightly disturbed. Peter was the most experienced antique appraiser. He had spent more than 10 years with antiques. If there was something he could not decide, it would be something uncommon. With that thought in mind, Yvonne rushed to open the door and went out. Daryl kept the fan, and followed her from behind. Once they reached the main hall, they saw a young lad with a little box on the counter in front of him. The young lad who came from Lin City was Leo White. Due to a family member suffering from cancer, he wished to sell off the family treasure for money. A few other store owners nearby were also there after hearing about it. After Peter explained the background story to Yvonne, he introduced her. "This is our lady boss, Ms. Yvonne." Leo nodded honestly and said, "If you as the lady boss is unable to decide, I will have to go to another store." After saying that, he opened the box. In the box was a blood-colored jade pendant. With an antique carving, the surface was round and moist. The most unique part was that there was some red tear-like pattern inside. Yvonne could not stop talking after she set her eyes on it. Blood tear jade? The few other antique store owners took deep breaths and were all in awe. "Hey, it's really a blood tear jade. Look at the color, it's top quality." The few antique store owners were chatting among each other, and were amazed. Leo felt proud and nodded with pride to Yvonne. Then, he said, "You're really the lady boss. With just one look you can identify that it is a blood tear jade. Did you see the word carvings on the surface? It belongs to the Eastern Jin dynasty." The blood tear jade was a type of an ancient jade. The blood jade was formed by mixing the blood of ancestors. This particular kind of jade with a tear-like pattern inside was known as the blood tear jade. As such, it was extremely rare. After hearing Leo's words, all the other antique store owners became emotional. "It's really from the Eastern Jin dynasty." "That's right, look at the carving on the surface. It is definitely from that era." Yvonne asked Leo after admiring it for a moment, "How much money do you want for it?" Although that was the first time Yvonne had seen a blood tear jade, she had seen plenty of materials about the blood jade. The one Leo had was the same as what she knew. Hence, Yvonne was very certain it was a real blood tear jade. Hearing the comments from the other few antique store owners, she was more confident with her judgment. However, the moment Yvonne asked Leo about the price, Daryl silently shook his head. Others might not know about the blood jade, but Daryl was an expert. Daryl's grandpa had one. He used to play with it when he was little. Hence, at first sight, he knew Leo's was a fake. The young lad really had the guts to cheat the young family. Yvonne was still young and inexperienced. Thus, it was a given that she could not identify the scam. However, even the other few antique store owners joined in. It seems like they were only carried along in the conversation. It was humiliating indeed. Thinking of that, Daryl had no intention of revealing the scam yet. He was just observing how things progressed. At that moment, Leo waved his hands and said, $150 million. Yvonne nodded and bit her lips. Half a year ago, in an auction, a similar blood tear jade from the East Jin dynasty was sold for the price of $150 million. It seemed like Leo had done his research before coming to the store. However, that was an auction, not a trade. They were not the same. Yvonne smiled and spoke, looking at Leo. "Too expensive." Leo insisted. "This is the price. I will never sell it if not because I am desperate for money for my family's medical treatment. This was passed down from my ancestors." Hearing those words, Yvonne started to have doubts. The other antique shop owners all felt a little complicated. Yvonne was still too young. A blood tear jade was something one could rarely get. It was definitely a gain if one could purchase it. The young family would not be short of the $150 million. At that moment, if it was not because of their financial position, the other antique shop owners would have definitely fought to deal with Leo. Right at that juncture, a middle-aged man, dressed in traditional Chinese costume, wearing a pair of golden-framed glasses, walked into the store. Peter quickly walked toward him and greeted. "Hi mister, what can I do for you?" The middle-aged man smiled and said, "I am Jack. I'm here in Donghai City on a business trip. My favorite hobby is collecting antique items. I heard about the famous Pearl Pavilion. Hence, I'm here to look around." He also bragged, "I'm here to look for some good stuff. Price is not an issue as long as I like it." As his eyes landed on Leo's blood tear jade, he was really excited and said, Oh, isn't this the red blood jade that everyone was talking about? Leo replied, sure is. Seeing Jack could not resist and picked up the jade, Leo quickly said, be careful. Do not break it. Jack laughed loudly. Don't you worry, I will compensate you if I break it. He then asked, little brother, does this jade belong to you? What's the price? Leo rolled his eyes, stretched out 2 fingers and said, 500 million bucks. Before he could finish, Jack patted his thigh and said, great, I'll take it. At that moment, Leo glared at Yvonne with pride, as if he was saying, see, I was offering 150 million bucks and you hesitated. Do you regret it now since there was a wealthy man who doesn't care about the price tag? Yvonne felt nervous and said, Mr. White, you have agreed to sell it to me just now. We have rules in the antique business. We are still in negotiation. You cannot just sell to someone else. Yvonne was really nervous. The jade was worth 500 million bucks and Jack just wanted it without further thought. Yvonne hurriedly said, Mr. White, didn't you just say you were selling it to me for 150 million bucks? I'll take it. Looking at this, Daryl could not but laugh in his heart. Haha. Leo and Jack were obviously partners and they were just acting. He did not expect Yvonne to have believed it for real. Jack was annoyed and said, Ms. Young, I already accepted the purchase of the Blood Tear jade for 500 million bucks. You can keep the 150 million bucks for yourself. Yvonne appeared as if she did not hear a word and looked sharply at Leo. Mr. White, I will take the jade. Although my price is lower, you will still need to sell it to me. You do need to stick to your words, right? The other antique store owners nodded in agreement. Yes, first come first served. Little brother, we must stick to the principle. You are still negotiating with Ms. Young. It is not right to sell to others. The antique store owners were unanimously on Yvonne's side. Needless to say, the Young family was really famous in the antique industry. Therefore, whoever was in that industry would like to build a relationship with them. Never mind. Leo seemed pressured and sighed. He apologized to Jack. Sorry sir. Although you offered 500 million bucks, I cannot sell it. I have to sell it to Ms. Young. He then turned to Yvonne and nodded. I'm not a greedy person. Since you are willing to take it at 150 million, I will sell it to you. A man has to keep his words. Sigh. Never knew you were a man with integrity. I'm offering 500 million bucks but you refused to sell to me. Jack pressed his lips, looking sad and said, this stone is worth at least $1 billion. Ms. Young, you are making a huge profit. As he spoke, he shook his head miserably. At that moment, Yvonne was beyond excited. She quickly instructed Peter, who was beside her. Hurry up and arrange the payment to Mr. White. Peter nodded and was about to ask for the bank details from Leo to prepare the payment. Ha 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 ha, this is so funny. At that juncture, Daryl, who had been watching them all along, broke into laughter. Ha ha, Jake and Leo's acting was really hilarious. Sensing humiliation in Daryl's laughter, Leo squeezed his brows and said, what are you laughing about? At the same time, Yvonne also raised her brows with eyes full of questions. Daryl glared at the jade pendant in the box and smiled. Isn't it ridiculous to watch people fight over a fake product? As he spoke, Daryl sent the message he had drafted earlier. The message was sent to the criminal investigation team leader, Megan Costello. Previously, when Ashton was arrested for holding people hostage, Megan had instructed Daryl to follow them to record his statement. However, as Daryl could not make it, they left their contact details with each other. Leo and Jack were trying to cheat Yvonne in front of him, so of course Daryl would not let it happen. It had to be mentioned that their acting skills were really good. Not only had they managed to deceive the other antique store owners, but even Yvonne had fallen for the trap. However, at that moment, everyone in the antique store was stunned. That man claimed that the Blood Tear jade was a fake? Was something wrong with that man? There were so many antique store owners who all knew that the jade was genuine. But that man claimed it was fake. Leo was the first to react and replied coldly. Interesting. However, this is our family's treasure. It has been passed down from generations to generations. How dare you say that it is a fake? Who are you? At that moment, everyone started to come to their senses. One of the antique store owners took a look at Daryl and said, Hey, isn't this the live-in son-in-law of the Linden family? Ha ha ha. The words stirred up their thoughts. Soon, all the other antique store owners started to realize that it was Daryl. Oh, it is true. It was rumored that this fella just sits at home every day, usurping his wife's wealth. All of them started to gossip about Daryl. The store owner next door, Mr. Larley, laughed at Daryl. "Hey, son-in-law of the Linden family, how dare you claim that the Blood-Tear jade is a fake? You wouldn't know about antique appraisal now, would you?" Hearing that, the rest broke into laughter. Ha ha ha, he was the notorious useless guy in Donghai City and he knew about antique appraisal? I guess he was only after some attention. Guess no more. It must have been he was not appreciated by the Linden family, so he is here looking for dignity. However, young fella, you are at the wrong place. This is Pearl Pavilion. Don't make a fool of yourself. The few antique store owners broke into laughter, as Yvonne bit her lips tightly. She looked at Daryl silently, feeling troubled. The Blood-Tear jade in front of her, no matter the material, color, or craftsmanship, matched the information she researched before this. Why would he claim that it was a fake? Yvonne thought that Daryl was not the same as what people used to describe him as. It was unexpected that after meeting him, he was indeed a useless person. No wonder everyone despised him. He did not have any knowledge on antiques at all and was just pretending. At that moment, Leo and Jack looked at each other and smiled. They were wondering about Daryl's background, and now they knew that he was just a live-in son-in-law that everyone looked down on. Shit, that scared the both of them. The next moment, Leo, as if he was defamed, rebutted while looking at Daryl. The lady boss of Pearl Pavilion and the other store owners here all identified that this is a genuine item. All of them are famous antique merchants. You are the only one claiming it is a fake. If you can't give a reasonable explanation, I will report you to the police, suing you for obstructing our normal trade. Oh, the thief was claiming to be another thief, and their acting was getting better. Looking at Leo's serious face, Daryl laughed again. He picked up the Blood-Tear jade from the box, gave it a squeeze in his hands and said slowly. A Blood-Tear jade was formed because of human blood that flowed into the jade, forming the tear markings. That was how it got its name. Among this, depending on the jade's material, as well as environmental factors and consequences of other factors, the formation of a Blood-Tear jade was extremely difficult, and hence extremely rare. However, the one that you have here, even though there are some tear marks in it, they were not formed naturally. It should only be intentionally human-made. Aside from the tear marks, the material of your jade here, even though they are of good quality and the carvings on the surface is unique, it is not from the Eastern Jin dynasty. Thus, it looks like it was produced recently. As he spoke, Daryl lifted the jade, looked at it in detail and nodded. Yes, there is still a sense of moistness. If I guessed correctly, in order to make it look seasoned, you have intentionally buried it in the ground for a year or more. After speaking, Daryl threw the jade pendant back into the box and smiled. As such, it is just a rather new imitation. As to say that it was from the Eastern Jin dynasty would be rubbish. Bang! Daryl's voice was not loud, but at that moment, everyone heard it loud and clear. Suddenly, the few antique store owners were all stunned. This young fella's words made perfect sense. Does that mean the piece of Blood-Tear jade was really a fake? Was if they were wrong? The truth was, the few antique store owners had only heard about the rare Blood-Tear jade. None of them had seen a real one before. Hence they were all in doubt and did not make a sound. Yvonne's eyes were shining as they looked closely at Daryl. Her heart felt all emotional. What Daryl had said, she knew them as well, but he presented the facts to them so clearly. Where did he learn all that? At that moment, Leo could not hold himself back as his face turned red, and he gave a cold grin. It was spoken as if it was real, but let me ask you, since you have made so many remarks, do you have any proof? Exactly. After all the talking, it was time to show some solid proof. At that moment, the few antique store owners, together with Yvonne, were looking at Daryl. Yvonne was rather emotional and nervous. She was emotional because if Daryl was able to produce evidence, she would have gained more experience. She was nervous due to the fact that if it was ascertained that the blood jade was a fake, it would confirm the fact that she had been cheated, and would have brought shame to the family. One needed to know that the young family had been in the antique business for generations. Although she was young, no one would be more knowledgeable than her in the entire Donghai city in terms of antiques. So, you want proof? Daryl looked at Leo, smiled and said, "It's simple. In a naturally formed Blood-Tear jade, over a long period of time, the blood in the jade will take the form of a mist. In contrast, one that was man-made, due its short formation time, Even though it formed a tear shape, if we use a special magnifier, we will be able to see that there are some tiny droplets inside. This is because the fresh blood has not dissolved completely. While Daryl was speaking, the store manager Peter already brought out a special magnifier that was designed specifically for antique appraisal purposes. Peter took a look and said in a surprised tone, "There are really tiny droplets in it." Immediately, the other antique store owners surrounded him. Even Yvonne could not help herself but walked over in her stilettos. "You." With the proof being presented, Leo's face turned red as he stared angrily at Daryl, pointed at him but was not able to speak a single word. It was at that moment the sound of police sirens could be heard. Someone called the police? Leo started to break out into cold sweat and ran. Trying to escape? Stop him. A few antique store owners reacted and yelled at him. The other workers near them heard the yelling and immediately stopped Leo and held him down on the floor. Jack, pretending he was also a victim of the fraud, quickly said, "Shit, it is really a fake. This bastard almost cost me $500 million. He ran forward and spat on Leo, started scolding and was preparing to leave. However, when he turned and was about to leave Pearl Pavilion, a body dashed in front of him and blocked him. It was Daryl. "Shit, what's wrong with you? Why are you blocking me?" Jack looked upset. Everyone came over and watched them. Daryl said with a smile while looking at Jack, "You can't just leave your partner behind to get arrested, can you?" Jack's face turned green and said, "What do you mean? Enough. You don't have to pretend anymore. With your acting skills, you will be better off being an actor. Who wants to be a fraud?" Looking at Jack, who still refused to admit his fraud, Daryl sighed and shook his head. Jack wasted no time. He was about to walk past Daryl to make a run for it, only to realize that his shoulders were locked in by Daryl. At that moment, Jack felt that Daryl's hands were like vices. He could not release himself no matter how hard he tried. Jack's eyes were rolling around in panic as he was nervous and scolded him. "Idiot, are you sick? He was trying to cheat me, so what does it have to do with me?" I almost fell for the trap as well. All these were happening too fast for Yvonne to react, as she just stood frozen in her spot. It was then that Megan walked in with a few police officers. Megan was not in her uniform that day, but she still looked dignified. Her pair of tight jeans made her body look hot and sexy. She walked to Daryl and asked, "Is he a fraud too?" Not waiting for Daryl to reply, Jack pleaded, "Pretty officer, please give me some justice. I am here to buy antique items and I was also a victim. This young fella refused to let me go with no reasons, so please help me." A few of the antique store owners came forward to testify. "Yes, Mr. Trevor is here to buy antiques. We are the witnesses." "Hey, son-in-law of the Linden family, what are you doing? Even though you recognized the jade is fake by pure luck, you cannot accuse others." Daryl just laughed. What a bunch of silly men. It was obvious that Leo and Jack were acting together. Now that Leo was caught, they still could not see that Jack was a problem too. However, Daryl became speechless because even Megan believed Jack and the words of the other antique store owners. At that moment, Megan squeezed her brows and said to Daryl, "Daryl, you can't accuse him. Just let him go." Jack felt relieved, threw a cold grin at Daryl and said, "Did you hear that? I still have business meetings tomorrow. Will you be responsible if I can't attend them?" Sigh. Hearing the words from Megan, Daryl sighed. If he were to let Jack leave, he would surely find a way to get Leo out as well. They will then commit fraud elsewhere. Enough, he should mind his own business instead. Daryl was upset, but was about to release his grip. Suddenly, at that moment, he locked his brows. What was on Jack's face did not look right. Rip. The next second, Daryl acted at high speed, tearing off something from Jack's face. It was a mask. Arg. Looking at Jack's real face, everyone sighed. It was not about how scary Jack looked, but it was his despicable face that was a huge contrast to the honest look he had before. "It's you?" Megan caught on to Jack instantly. She recognized that man. To be more accurate, everyone in the police station knew Jack. He was the suspect of an antique fraud case a year ago. "Hurry up, and quickly take a look at Leo's face. See if there is a mask too." Megan was beyond excited. A few police officers quickly ran over to check, and without a surprise, they ripped a mask off Leo's face as well. A year ago, a wealthy merchant who came to Donghai City for investment was cheated off an antique painting valued at $1 billion by two partners. The head office of the police department put a lot of focus on this case and instructed Megan to solve the case as soon as possible. Due to the duo being smart, despite Megan following the case for a year, she failed to locate their trails. She did not expect that she would be able to catch them today. Megan was shivering as she had just made a great achievement. The other antique store owners who initially wanted to testify for Jack were all standing there speechless. They knew too well about the fraud case that happened a year ago. They never thought that the two of them were the masterminds, and had the guts to cheat the young family. At the same time, they also curiously looked at Daryl. Their masks were so real that none of them saw through it. How did he manage to see it? They did not question further due to Megan's presence. At that moment, Megan instructed her officers to bring the two into the car, and then walked up to Daryl. Megan bit her lips and awkwardly said, "Daryl, I am sorry. I was too impulsive just now. I almost missed the chance to break the case. Thank you very much for your help." Daryl smiled and waved his hands. "It was nothing, I just didn't want to let the bad guys escape." Megan nodded and asked curiously, "How did you know that Jack was wearing a mask?" Daryl thought for a moment and casually replied, "It was nothing extraordinary. When he was struggling just now, a tiny piece of the mask rolled up and I caught sight of it." To be honest, Daryl himself was rather puzzled about her question too. Jack's disguise was perfect. The only flaw was the joint between the mask and his neck. This flaw was unnoticeable by normal humans, but he was unsure why he noticed it. Since when did his vision get so much better? Daryl was mumbling in his heart. Megan did not doubt him, smiled and said, "No matter what, I really thank you for your help. I shall buy you dinner when there is a chance in the future." After saying that, Megan left. During the journey back to the police station, Leo and Jack, who were in the backseat, were furious and dissatisfied. The both of them had planned the fraud trap for a while now. They thought that it was a perfect plan. However, they did not expect Daryl to bust their plan at the most critical moment. Jack asked Leo in anger, "That fella is Daryl Darby, right?" Leo nodded. That was what the other antique owners said. He is apparently the live-in son-in-law of the Linden family. Jack bit his lips and clenched his fists. "Shit, when we get out of here one day, we shall kill him." Back at the Pearl Pavilion, watching everyone leave, Yvonne walked over in her stilettos. She asked, "Daryl, how did you know that the two of them were a fraud?" Daryl grinned and casually explained, "It was nothing. It's just that I read a lot of detective works. Besides, their acting was really bad, to be honest." Seeing how easy it sounded from him, Yvonne laughed and asked further, "The knowledge of the blood-tear jade that you shared just now, where did you learn it from?" Oh no, this was a hard question. Daryl gave it a thought and said, "About that, I learned about antiques from an old master, so." Daryl shrugged. It was obvious. Appraising the authenticity of a blood-tear jade was just a simple task. Yvonne was suddenly emotional and sounded nervous. "What is the name of the old master? Where does he live?" She was unable to identify the authenticity of the blood-tear jade, but Daryl could easily identify it, and shared so much knowledge she never knew. The old master that taught him must have been even more knowledgeable. She had to meet this master no matter what. However, the reply from Daryl next made Yvonne very disappointed. Daryl replied in an apologetic manner, "I have not seen him for many years now. I'm not sure where he lives." Hearing that, Yvonne sighed. She did not want to continue on that topic. She looked at Daryl with a complicated heart and asked gently, "Daryl, can you promise me something?" "What is that?" Yvonne gently asked. "I hope to invite you to be our Pearl Pavilion's antique appraiser. You don't need to be at the store every day. You just need to be present when we need your help. The monthly salary will be $50,000. Is that fine?" To be honest, Yvonne was worried that $50,000 was a little low. However, that was the limit of her authority. Peter, the staff in charge, sighed deeply at that moment. What? An honorable antique appraiser deserved a monthly salary of $50,000? His salary was only slightly over $10,000 a month. After considering Daryl's explanation when he appraised the blood-tear jade, Peter had to admit that he was not as good, hence he stopped himself from feeling dissatisfied but remained envious of Daryl. After a small thought, Daryl agreed and said, "Oh, since I don't have to be here every day, it should be fine." It was such a great offer, and yet he was showing a difficult expression. Had he turned crazy after being the live-in son-in-law? Looking at Daryl's reaction, Peter became speechless. Yvonne was delighted as she said, "That's great. It's finalized then." Daryl smiled and bid farewell to Yvonne as the day was getting late. The next afternoon, when Daryl reached his office, Pearl quickly went forward to give him an update. Pearl respectfully asked, "President, today is the airing of the latest episode of the Superstar program. It is also Giselle's debut in the show. Will you want to be there to show support?" Daryl shook his head. "I'll miss it. Please set up a rebroadcast at my office later. I will just watch it from here." Giselle's makeover was done by the Linden family. His wife, Lily, was the person in charge. As such, Lily would definitely be there at the show. If he was to attend, his identity would be revealed. "Yes, President." Pearl nodded and went ahead with the setup. An hour later, the screen in the office was broadcasting the live show. Undeniably, Giselle really had the potential to be a star. Together with the makeover by Lily, she looked lively and stunning. All the audience roared when she appeared. However, halfway through the recording, some matters arose. At the request of her fans, Giselle sang a song. Suddenly, the earpiece she was wearing became faulty. Initially, she was singing really well, but due to the malfunction, she fell behind the beat. At the end, after some commotion on stage, Giselle stomped off and went backstage. Soon, the matter was widely publicized by the media. There were various comments. Some said that Giselle lip-synced. Some of them said she did it intentionally with the objective to increase the popularity of the news. In summary, the media had doubts of Giselle's singing ability. Watching the news, Daryl slammed the door and called for Pearl. Daryl said coldly, "Investigate this thoroughly. I want to know what is going on." Pearl nodded and made a few calls. She soon found out what happened. Pearl carefully reported, "President Darby, there were 3 staff in charge of Giselle's earpiece backstage. But all of them denied that they were responsible for the malfunction." Daryl smiled lightly. It had to be something to do with the 3 of them. "Fine, bring all 3 of them here." "Yes, President." Looking at the confident look on Daryl's face, Pearl was curious, but dared not question further. Watching Pearl exiting his office, Daryl made a call. "Felix, come over to Platinum Corporation." "Yes, now." After 10 minutes, the 3 staff members were brought into the office, but all of them looked calm. Sitting on the chair behind the desk was Felix Blakely in a suit. Honestly, Daryl had many ways to make the 3 of them tell the truth, but he did not want to take the trouble to do so. Besides, Daryl did not want more people knowing about his identity. Hence, he asked for Felix to come over. Staring at the 3 of them, Felix asked coldly, "During the program, Giselle's earpiece malfunctioned. What really happened?" Daryl, who was sitting at the side, did not react. He was just casually smoking his cigarette. The 3 of them agreed with each other not to say a single word. Thus, they shook their heads in unison, indicating that they did not know. They did not pay attention to Daryl, thinking that he was Felix's bodyguard. Felix laughed and said, "Do you know who I am? I am Felix Blakely." "What? Felix Blakely?" Upon hearing this name, the 3 staff members shivered. One of them was even trembling. The entire Donghai city knows Felix. He had connections with both the good and the dark side. Why was he there? What relationship did he have with Platinum Corporation? "It's fine if the 3 of you refuse to talk. Let me be frank from the start. If my investigation showed that it had something to do with you, you can imagine what the consequences are." Right at the moment Felix finished his words, the guy standing at furthest left could not stand it anymore, and said, I'll tell. The other 2 exchanged looks, and nodded nervously too. Daryl, who was sitting on the couch at that moment, smiled. After a few minutes, Felix dismissed the 3 of them. He stood and said to Daryl, "Mr. Darby, it's all clear now." Daryl laughed. He stood up and patted Felix's shoulder. "You're doing great, Felix. Your business is doing so well that in the past 2 years, you're getting even more famous now."